On the 24th of June, 2026, a fragmentary message comes out of the Vosges Valley in the north of Pakistan. On one of the mountains of the Karakoram, there has been an accident. There are almost no details, and the few that exist contradict one another. At first they speak of 2 people missing. Then, that one has died, and 2 survivors came down on their own. It isn't even clear which mountain the tragedy happened on. They name K6, but right away add that it could have been the neighboring Kapura. The names arrive garbled. The survivors are recorded as Christina Maria and Boris Jules, only for it to turn out later that the first and last names had been mixed up. In the earliest reports, the man who died is called Pierre Guillaume. Little by little, the truth begins to show through the fog. On the ascent, at an altitude of around 5,000 meters, an avalanche of snow and rock came down. It swept over a party of 3. One of them was killed on the spot. The other 2 survived and managed to descend. A little more time passes, and the name of the dead man becomes known. It changes everything, because the man whose life ended on an obscure mountain in Pakistan was one of the most brilliant figures in the world of steep skiing, a skier who came down lines where it was thought to be impossible, and at the same time, a man whose work had been seen by tens of millions of people who had no idea what his name was. To understand who the mountains lost on that June morning, you have to go back to a quiet corner of France where he stood on skis before he could walk, and to the work that brought him an audience of millions and left his name absent from its memory. His name was Guillaume Pierrel. In the world of high-altitude mountaineering and steep skiing, he was well known. It is a narrow circle where the names of the strongest are passed from mouth to mouth, and serious ascents are talked about for years. But true, mass fame came to him from a place where he was not looking for it at all. In 2024, the French content creator Inoxtag, who has millions of subscribers, set his sights on climbing Everest and spent a year preparing for it on camera. Out of that preparation came the film Kaizen. Among those who led the newcomer into the mountains and taught him to survive at altitude was Pierrel. The success of the film was unprecedented. Kaizen pulled in more than 11 million views in less than a single day, a record for France on YouTube, and over time it passed 50 million. It was even shown in cinemas. For a huge audience outside the world of mountaineering, this was a first touch of the great mountains, and one of the guides into that world was Pierrel himself. So when word of his death came, it was not only mountaineers who said goodbye to him. Inoxtag spoke to his subscribers directly. He remembered the man who had accompanied him on his climbs during the preparation, and added something that in those days landed especially hard. The mountains are as beautiful as they are dangerous. The photographer Matisse Dumas, who had also worked on that expedition, said his farewell too, posting a shared photo of the 3 of them in Nepal. But behind that media image stood a figure of an entirely different scale. To the world of the great mountains, Pierrel was not that blogger's guide. He was a master whose name stood beside descents that are hard to believe, and the road to them had begun far from the Himalaya, in the quiet, modest mountains of his childhood. Guillaume Pierrel was born in 1983 in La Bresse, a small town in the Vosges Mountains in eastern France. It is a quiet, wooded country. Here the mountains are low, the slopes gentle, and the winters long and full of snow. A place where you stand on skis before you have really learned to walk. So, it was with him. He put on skis at the age of 2. He made his first serious ascent at 4. The mountains and the snow were not a passion that comes later in life. They were the backdrop of his whole existence from the very start, and he absorbed them before he could have explained them. First came sport. As a junior, Pierrel became vice champion of France in cross-country skiing, a discipline that hardens endurance and character. But the race course turned out to be too small for him. He was drawn higher and farther, to where there are no markers and no finish gate. He trained as a mountain guide with the highest international qualification and settled in Chamonix, the little town at the foot of Mont Blanc, the world capital of mountaineering, where the most ambitious and the most daring gather. Nor did he stop at being a guide. Pierrel took a camera into the mountains. He founded his own film company and made documentaries about the mountains, not simply recording descents but turning them into stories. Athlete, guide, and storyteller all lived in him at once. In just a few years, the boy from the gentle Vosges slopes grew into one of the most notable masters of steep skiing of his generation. And his fame came not from races and not from films, but from what he began to do on the snow, descents that are hard to believe. To understand what exactly made Pierrel exceptional, you have to picture a slope where the snow barely holds at all, too steep for skis to find purchase, too sheer for a mistake to be forgiven. Lines like these became his signature. The most famous example is the north face of the Druze in the Mont Blanc Massif, a granite wall that for decades was considered unfit for skis. The snow simply will not stay on it. Pierrel descended it solo. Where others saw bare rock and emptiness, he found the thin thread of a descent and skied it. The list of his lines reads like a catalogue of places forbidden to skiers. Le Linceul, the Shroud, on the Grande Jorasses, the 8,000er Gasherbrum in the Karakoram, skied in alpine style, light and without oxygen. Lines from the clouds in New Zealand and in the Canadian Rockies. Each of them demanded not only skiing of the very highest class, but the skills of a high-altitude mountaineer. First, you had to climb those walls. He had another side to his story, too, a purely alpine one, no less dense. All 82 of the Alpine 4000ers, the three great north faces of the Alps, the very ones held to be the benchmark of skill and nerve. For most professionals, even a fraction of that list would be enough for an entire career. Many of his greatest descents he made not alone, but roped to the Canadian Christina Lustenberger. Their partnership became one of the most brilliant in modern steep skiing, and it will return to this story in the most tragic way of all. For all that, those who knew him noted a rare trait. He reached for great goals, but never turned them into a way of rising above others. There was no arrogance in his ambition. This craft has a merciless arithmetic. The harder the lines, the more often you go to the edge, the longer luck has to stay on your side. Sooner or later, even for the best, too many descents accumulate, in each of which the right to make a mistake equals zero. Pierrel understood this. A few months before his death, in one of his interviews, he said so with unexpected bluntness. He admitted he had been meaning to ease off, to stop taking on so much risk, to stop skiing such desperate, uncompromising lines. It was as if he were saying out loud what many in his line of work arrive at, once they reach a certain age. But, right then, in the same breath, he contradicted himself. Mountaineers, he said, have the memory of a goldfish. You tell yourself, that's it, I'm done. And then you come down into the valley, boredom starts to gnaw at you, and back up you go. The pull of the great mountains is stronger than the arguments of reason, and he knew this weakness in himself. And then he spoke words that today read entirely differently. Sometimes I'm wiser than I used to be, Pierrel said. I'm still alive, maybe partly because of that. A calm, almost matter-of-fact statement from a man who had long since learned to count survival as part of his craft, rather than something to be taken for granted. That winter he packed his rucksack again. Ahead lay Pakistan and a new objective, a mountain that was distant, hard to reach, and known to almost no one. To understand exactly what he was setting out for, you first have to understand what kind of mountain it is. The mountain was called K6, or Baltistan Peak. It stands in the Masherbrum Range, at the head of the Hush Valley, in one of the most inaccessible corners of the Pakistani Karakoram. That name will mean nothing to most people, and that is exactly the point. K6 is not an 8,000er, and in the Karakoram, attention and fame go to the giants that pass the 8,000-meter mark. K2, the second highest mountain in the world, Broad Peak, the two Gasherbrums, and, standing a little apart, Nanga Parbat. Against them, K6 is all but invisible. In the popular imagination, it simply does not exist. But ask the professionals about it, and the picture turns over. Among the elite of mountaineering, it is a legendary peak, enormous, almost vertical walls, a colossal drop above the valleys, and the reputation of one of the great prizes of the region. No one brings clients here up fixed ropes. Only a handful come here at all. Just how serious a mountain it is best explained by a single figure. The main summit of K6 rises to 7,282 meters, and in more than half a century, it has been climbed only once, by an Austrian expedition in 1970. One ascent of the main point in over 50 years. The side summits of the Massif fell even later, and only to the strongest. For the first ascent of one of them, the climbers received the Piolet d'Or, the highest award in this world, something like an Oscar. And to this mountain, which only a few people had ever even managed to climb, the team came with an entirely different design. They meant not merely to go up, but to ski down it. No one had ever skied K6. Were they to succeed, it would be the first descent in history. Which summit and which route exactly they had chosen, the team did not reveal. That remained their secret. 3 people set out for this mountain. On the 6th of June, 2026, a small team set foot on the mountain. There were 3 of them. Guillaume Pierrel, Christina Lustenberger, that same Canadian, his partner on the boldest descents, and another Frenchman, the mountain guide Boris Langenstein, an experienced high-altitude climber with big lines of his own in the Himalaya behind him. They went in alpine style. That means without a chain of camps prepared in advance, without fixed ropes, without support teams hauling loads to the top. Just themselves, traveling light, with the bare minimum of gear, betting on speed and technique. In this style, a mountain is climbed quickly and cleanly, but it leaves far less room for error. Should disaster strike, you will have only yourself to rely on. The ascent went as it should. And on the 24th of June, still on the approach to the summit, still low on the mountain, at an altitude of around 5,000 meters, everything changed. An avalanche came down from above, a mass of snow mixed with rock. It swept over the party as they climbed, in a place where the slope did not yet seem the most dangerous. Guillaume Pierrel was killed. The avalanche left him no chance. Lustenberger and Langenstein found themselves out of the main flow. Both survived, both came away without serious injury, and managed to descend the mountain. Once down, they got in touch by satellite phone to tell their families they were alive. That same message, passing through the Hush Valley, soon became those very fragmentary, muddled reports with which it all began. But before the world learned the names, there was one more hard task to do on the slope, to bring the dead man down off the mountain. Death in the Great Mountains rarely ends with the death itself. After it begins a separate grinding piece of work, to get the dead off the mountain and bring them down. On a 7,000er, in an inaccessible part of the Karakoram, this is a task at the limit of the possible, and it has to be carried out by the living, who risk themselves for someone who can no longer be helped. The first hope was for a helicopter, but the sky in those days seemed to turn its back on the rescuers. Over the Baltoro Glacier, an unusual heat had settled, and in the thin, warm air, a rotorcraft loses its lift. The helicopter could not climb to the altitude required. The fastest way out fell away of its own accord. One option remained, to carry the body down in their arms. That work was taken on by Balti porters, local men for whom the mountains of the Karakoram are not an arena for records, but a harsh home and hard-earned wages. Step by step, they brought the dead man down over the dangerous terrain to the lower camp. And on the 26th of June, a Pakistani rescue team of 4 completed the evacuation, lifting the body off what was officially called the extremely dangerous terrain of K6. What exactly came down on the slope that morning has never been fully established, but there is a strong theory. The avalanche was set off by unstable snow that had settled after a swing, typical of that season. A heavy snowfall followed by a sharp warming. There is no proving this after the fact, and the cause remains a supposition. In this story, it is easy to overlook those who bore its darkest part. The names of the dead stars travel around the whole world. The names of the porters and rescuers who risked themselves to return a body to the family are remembered by almost no one. But without them, this story would have no ending. The avalanche that morning drew a line between 3 people, and that line fell at random. 1 died. The other 2, who were right beside him, on the same wall, bound by the same thread of fate, came down without a single serious injury. There is no logic in it, no justice, only the second and the meter of slope where the falling mass caught you. Christina Lustenberger was not merely Pierrel's partner in the mountains. She was the companion of his life, and that gives what happened one more dimension, an entirely personal one. Her own path was a rare one. A former alpine racer for the Canadian national team and an Olympian, after a string of operations on her knees, she left top-level sport and turned to ski mountaineering. And there, in the world of sheer walls, Christina Lustenberger came into her own again. In the space of a few years, she put together dozens of first descents. What Pierrel meant to her is best told by her own words, spoken while he was still alive. Of one of their shared lines she once let slip, "I'd been looking at it for 10 years. The partnership with G gave me the confidence to finally ski it. In those words is the whole essence of their rope. Together they dared what neither had the heart for alone. There was one more turn that sends a chill down the spine. Exactly a year before this day, to the day, Boris Langenstein had made the first descent in history of the Rupel face of Nanga Parbat, one of the greatest achievements in the discipline. The 24th of June had been the date of his triumph, and that same date became the day his rope partner died, which leaves a question no one has an answer to. Why does one man stay below, under the snow, while the other two go on? There is a detail in Pierrel's death that does not fit the usual logic. We instinctively think the ones who die are the ones who erred, who miscalculated, who went where they shouldn't have. That skill is armor, and the stronger you are, the safer you are. Here, it was all different. Pierrel did not die on the crux, the technically difficult section, not on some dizzying descent, where the cost of a movement is at its highest. Disaster overtook him low on the mountain, on the way up, in a relatively easy spot, where it came not from within, not from his own mistake, but from above and from outside. The snow that came down the slope took no interest in who was standing in its way. This is what is called objective danger. An avalanche, a collapsing cirrus, rock fall, they come of their own accord, regardless of how good you are. You can pick the line perfectly. You can be in the best form of your life and make only the right decisions and still find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong second. Experience and class can lower the probability of disaster, but they cannot reduce it to zero. Pierrel is not alone in this. Hilary Nelson, one of the strongest ski mountaineers in the world, died the same way. In 2022, on the descent from the summit of Manaslu, she triggered a small avalanche and was carried by it almost 2,000 meters down. Like Pierrel, she was killed not by an error in technique, but by sliding snow. And the history of skiing on K2 is strewn with the names of those who fell on the steep ice. The pattern is plain, and it is merciless. The higher the class, the more outings at the limit you have behind you, the more chances chance has to catch you off guard. And one day, it does not let the chance slip. In the mountains, the highest mastery is leveled with luck, and at times, it sets the genius on a par with the beginner. To understand why this happens, you have to look closely at the very craft Pierrel helped to create. Steep ski mountaineering lies exactly on that edge where chance decides everything, and it is built so that it cannot be otherwise. Its essence is simple to say, and monstrous in fact. You have to climb a mountain, and then ski down it on a slope where any mistake goes unforgiven. Not to fall, not to stumble, not to let a ski slide where there are hundreds of meters of sheer drop beneath you. This is not a run down a ski piste. This is balancing over an abyss on 2 strips of slick plastic. And here is what sets this discipline apart from ordinary mountaineering. For a climber, it is enough to go up and to come carefully back down on foot, belaying as he goes. Here the ascent is only half the matter. The real test begins at the summit, when you have to put on skis and ride down the very wall you climbed with such difficulty. And the descent is harder than the ascent for another reason too. You come to it already emptied out. The fatigue of many hours is piled up. The air is thin, and from oxygen starvation the mind clouds, movements and reactions slow. At such an altitude, even a simple act is a struggle. To bend down, to clip in the bindings, to make numbed hands obey. And all of this, just before the most dangerous thing you have to face today. So, the price of admission to this discipline is most honestly counted not in failures and retreats from a route, but in human lives. Here it is not, it didn't work out. Here it is, he didn't come back. And it is all the more astonishing that the best of the best step onto this edge again and again all the same. And here arises a question to which there is no rational answer. If this edge is so merciless, if it takes even the strongest, why do the best in the world return to it again and again? Why, having lost friends and knowing the cost, do they pack the rucksack once more and go up? This paradox is seen best in a single figure, the Pole Andrzej Bargiel, a man who did what no one had managed. He is the only one to have skied the whole of K2, the second highest mountain in the world and one of the deadliest peaks on the planet, without oxygen and without once removing his skis from summit to glacier. Before him, that descent had cost the lives of several strong skiers. He skied it. Bargiel did not stop there. In 2025, he became the first in history to ski down Everest without supplemental oxygen. As of today, he is the only person to have skied off all the 8,000ers of the Karakoram without oxygen, and to have conquered both of the highest peaks on Earth on skis. Each such descent is a voluntary step onto the very edge, where chance is stronger than mastery. And men like him are not a few scattered figures somewhere in the past. They are here and now. In that very summer, when Pierrel's life ended on the slope of K6, dozens of mountaineers and skiers all across the Karakoram were buckling their crampons and heading up their own routes. The mountains had just shown how it can all end, and the season was only beginning. Its first page was this death. Pierrel's death was the first of the season in the Karakoram in 2026. The first because the season in these mountains was only just getting underway. Summer here comes late, and by the end of June, the big expeditions are only deploying. Teams reach base camps, set up communications, make their first acclimatization outings. The main ascents, the pushes on the 8,000ers, usually still lie ahead in July and August. The tragedy came at the very start, before the season had had time to gather pace. And there were plenty of people in the mountains that summer. On Nanga Parbat, a Sherpa expedition was at work, and there too came that same André Barguil, set on another of his ski descents. On Broad Peak, the 8,000er next door, two men stood in complete solitude, a rope team that at the start of the season found itself entirely alone on that whole vast mountain. A strong Spanish team went on to the two Gasherbrums, together with an experienced Romanian climber. On Masherbrum, the Czechs were gathering, and yet the season was shaping up to be difficult. The logistics this year were noticeably harder than usual, and almost none of the familiar Western commercial operators remained in the Karakoram. The Great Mountains of Pakistan in 2026 turned out to be far emptier and harder to reach than in other years. And over this season that had not even begun, over mountains where the expeditions were only deploying, fell the first shadow. One of the best skiers in the world had died before anyone had set out for a summit. How the season would end was not yet known, but it opened with a tragedy, and the echo of it rolled across the entire mountaineering world. It rang loudest where Pierrel was known not as a name from the news, but as a living person. When the fragmentary reports finally came together into a clear and terrible picture, what came to the fore was what remains after any person, the people who knew him. And their voices said more about Pierrel than any list of conquered walls. His friend, a mountain guide from Chamonix, remembered not the records but the living man, a charming Frenchman with a mischievous smile and an inexhaustible thirst for life, with whom he had skied more than one great line. There was no grandeur in those words, only a simple grief for a friend who is no longer at his side. The photographer who had filmed Pierrel in the mountains more than once, and once skied beside him in New Zealand, said it short and weighty. One of the greatest of his generation is gone. And a well-known mountain publication, in its farewell, found perhaps the most precise formula for why he was so loved. In him, there was enormous ambition, but without the egocentrism that so often goes with it. And still, over this story, there hangs a question to which we never found an answer. Why do the best of the best, again and again, choose a path that may cost them their lives? Why, knowing the price, do they go back over and over to where one may not return? Perhaps it was Pierrel himself who answered it most precisely. When he was once asked what he would say to the young, to those who want to follow, he answered simply, "Do not repeat what has already been done. Go your own way and believe in yourself." He lived exactly like that, and the mountains that took his life became the very price he paid for that path.